She did not hold a press conference. She did not issue a lengthy statement. What Princess Anne did was quieter than that, and somehow that made it more shocking. Word reached palace observers in early 2025. A decision had been made, not forced, not sudden, deliberate. And those who understand how the British monarchy actually operates say it carries implications that will echo for years. For decades, Anne has been the one constant in a royal family that has seen scandal, grief, and fracture. While others stepped back, she stepped forward. While headlines swirled around other royals, she worked. 500 engagements in a single year, no complaints, no drama. So when news emerged that Princess Anne had made a dramatic decision about her royal future, the question wasn't simply what she had decided. The question was, what does the monarchy do now? Hi viewers, do you think Princess Anne has earned the right to redefine her role on her own terms? To understand what she decided, you first need to understand what she has quietly been carrying, almost entirely alone. The numbers alone tell a story most people never stop to consider. In 2023, Princess Anne carried out more than 400 official engagements across the United Kingdom and abroad. Different cities, different causes, different continents, all in a single calendar year. And she did it while King Charles was still finding his footing as the new sovereign. The woman standing quietly behind the throne was, by every measurable standard, working harder than anyone in front of it. But the sheer volume was only part of it. What royal observers had begun to notice was something more significant than statistics. Anne was no longer simply one of the most active working royals. She had become, in the view of many who follow the palace closely, functionally irreplaceable. And when a person becomes irreplaceable inside an institution that is simultaneously shrinking, something eventually has to give. Yet another detail was beginning to emerge, one that reframed the entire picture. King Charles's decision to reshape the monarchy into a smaller, tighter operation had not reduced the demand on the crown, it had concentrated it. Fewer royals meant fewer shoulders carrying the same weight, and Anne, who had never once asked for recognition, had quietly absorbed more than her share. Royal commentators described her schedule not as demanding, but as extraordinary. The kind of sustained output that raises genuine questions about how long any individual, regardless of dedication, can maintain it. That question was now being asked openly, and the answer, it turned out, had already been decided. What was happening inside the palace in the months before Anne's announcement was by most accounts not a crisis, it was a reckoning. King Charles had been managing his own health challenges since early 2024, challenges that were publicly confirmed and that required him to step back from certain duties during his treatment and recovery. The palace handled it with characteristic restraint. Adjustments were made quietly, schedules were managed, but the effect on those around him was significant. Anne stepped in. Of course she did. She took on additional engagements, additional travel, additional responsibilities, not because she was asked in any formal sense, but because that is simply who she is. Duty first, always. The requests followed her instinct rather than preceding it. But here is what palace watchers began to notice. The pressure accumulating around Anne was no longer just logistical, it was structural. The monarchy's slimmed-down model, designed to be leaner and more focused, had created a situation where the absence of even one senior working royal sent visible tremors through the entire calendar. Anne was not a piece of the system, she was increasingly load-bearing. And that raises an even bigger question, one the palace had quietly been confronting for some time. What happens when the person carrying the most weight decides it is time to carry it differently? The most revealing part was still ahead. Behind the public engagements and the ceremonial appearances, something had been shifting. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but those who observed the palace closely say the signals had been there for anyone paying attention. Anne turned 73 in August 2023. She had been carrying out full-time royal duties since she was a teenager. More than 5 decades of sustained public service, military appointments, charity commitments, Commonwealth visits, state occasions, without pause, without complaint, and almost entirely without public credit. Royal commentators had spent years describing her as the monarchy's engine, but even engines require maintenance. Reports began to surface suggesting that conversations had taken place, quiet, private and carefully managed, about the nature and pace of Anne's future commitments. Not retirement, that word has never been associated with Princess Anne, and those close to her have consistently rejected it, but a considered, deliberate recalibration, a transition that would allow her to remain central to the institution while operating at a pace that reflected not abandonment of duty, but wisdom about sustainability. What happened next changed the conversation entirely. Because it was not Anne who confirmed these developments first, it was the people around her, observers, commentators and palace analysts, who began reading the signs, and what they saw pointed clearly toward a decision that, once made, could not be quietly managed. It would have to be acknowledged, and when it was, Britain noticed. The announcement, when it finally came into focus, was not a single statement delivered from a podium. It rarely works that way inside the palace. Royal decisions of this nature tend to emerge in layers, through scheduling changes, through official adjustments, through the subtle architecture of a diary that tells its own story if you know how to read it. What became clear in early 2025 was that Princess Anne had begun a structured and intentional transition in the nature of her royal commitments. She would remain active, she would remain visible, her patronages, her military appointments, her deep and long-standing connections to the Commonwealth, none of these were being abandoned, but the pace, the volume, and the relentlessness of her previous schedule were being consciously reshaped. Palace sources described it, according to reports, as Anne choosing, for perhaps the first time in her life, to define what her service looks like, rather than simply accepting whatever was placed in front of her. That distinction matters more than it might appear. For a woman who has never once put herself before the institution, the act of setting any boundary at all carries extraordinary weight. Royal observers noted it immediately. This was not retreat, this was not diminishment, this was something far rarer inside the British monarchy, a senior royal exercising genuine personal agency on behalf of her own long-term well-being without once stepping away from the crown she has served. But the palace reaction was not what many had expected. The public response was immediate and it was emotional. Across Britain, the conversation that followed Anne's reported transition was not one of disappointment, it was one of overdue recognition. Commentators who had spent years calling her the monarchy's hardest worker now found themselves asking a question that felt almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. Had the institution ever truly appreciated what she gave? Royal biographers and analysts were quick to weigh in. The consensus, reflected across broadcast coverage and royal commentary throughout early 2025, was that Anne's decision represented something the monarchy rarely produces, a moment of genuine honesty, an acknowledgement that even the most committed royal is a human being first. But there was another layer to the reaction, one that touched on something deeper than scheduling or workload.
For King Charles, his sister's transition carried a personal weight that went beyond logistics. These are two people who grew up together inside one of the world's most scrutinized institutions, who watched their family fracture publicly in the 90s, who stood together at their mother's coffin as it made its final journey from Balmoral to London in September 2022. Their bond is not merely professional, it is the bond of shared witness, of two people who have seen everything, endured everything, and kept going regardless. What Anne's announcement meant for Charles personally, and what it now means for the monarchy's immediate future, is a question the palace has not fully answered, and that question matters more now than ever before. What Princess Anne has done is not leave. That must be understood clearly. She has not stepped away from the crown, from her patronages, from the causes she has spent 5 decades championing, or from the brother who depends on her more than the public is ever likely to fully know. What she has done is something arguably more significant. She has demonstrated that the British monarchy, for all its tradition, all its rigidity, all its institutional resistance to change, can accommodate the humanity of the people who serve it. That service and sustainability are not opposites, that a woman who has given more than anyone asked can, in the end, give on her own terms. That is her legacy, not the engagements counted, not the miles traveled, not the decades of silence when others sought headlines. The legacy is this, that she showed it was possible to serve completely without disappearing entirely into the service. For a monarchy navigating the most significant period of transition since the death of Queen Elizabeth, that lesson arrives at exactly the right moment. King Charles is rebuilding, Prince William is preparing, the institution is finding its shape for a new era, and Anne, steady as she has always been, is still there. But the palace is not standing still. In the weeks ahead, royal sources indicate that further decisions about the structure of working royal duties are expected, decisions that will directly affect how the crown presents itself to the public during a period when both Charles's health and the monarchy's long-term model remain under close scrutiny. Those conversations are happening now, behind the doors of Buckingham Palace, and what emerges from them will define what the British royal family looks like for the next generation. That story is only just beginning. Make sure you are subscribed to Britain Royals and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next one.